unusual. And a big part of the reason is that I feel like one of the things that I've never seen, but I believe is there, and the more that I see it, the more that I know it's there, is that Jesus Christ is revealed in the law of God. But how exactly? So the question that's my underlying question as I'm working through the law of God, as we're working through the 10 words, is where is Christ in the law of God? Jesus he said it to the Jews when he was here. He said, if you believed Moses, you would believe me. For Moses wrote about me. And so what Jesus and the apostles taught is that to keep the law of God means to believe in Jesus. So how does that come out of the law itself? And that's kind of what I'm wanting for us to get, is a deeper sense of how the law is actually so much pointing to Jesus Christ. And so that's kind of what we're looking at. So last week we started, and the first thing that we did is we looked at, the place of the law in for the people of Israel. What is the place of the law in the life of Israel? And what we saw is that it's central, right? The 10 words, they never called them the 10 commandments. We do, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they didn't. They called it either the testimony or they called it the 10 words. And what was special about the 10 words, just in case you weren't here last week, but what was special is that the 10 words alone, out of all the law of God, and there's a lot of commandments, there's a lot of statutes, testimonies, etc., but the 10 words are peculiar in this way, that they were the words that God himself spoke to the congregation of Israel at Mount Sinai out of the fire. Right? They gathered on a particular time, on a particular day. There's clouds and thick darkness and thundering, and then there's a trumpet blast that goes off in the background. I mean, a thoroughly frightening situation. And out of the fire, God spoke. They saw no form, but God spoke out of the fire before all the congregation. And the text that we have in Exodus chapter 20 about the law of God, those 10 words are the words that he spoke that day. And then when Moses went up on the mountain, then God, and he was up there for 40 days, God himself wrote those 10 words on the 2 tablets of stone, gave them to Moses. He broke the first set. The second set ended up being put in the Ark of the Testimony in the most holy place, which is really at the center. And so the bottom line is the place of the law, the place of the 10 words in Israel is the very heart of Israel itself. It was to be at the very heart of Israel itself. And so we see in that it is of critical importance. And so tonight, we wanted to kind of we're going to start soft because I'm dragging it out. I don't mean to drag it out, but I'm dragging it out because I want to kind of just take this step by step. The first thing that we want to look at is the context. The context that the law of God comes to us. And the reason I say that's so important, right, is because many of us, growing up in Reformed backgrounds, not all of us, but some of us, saw the law of God kind of like Martin Luther did at one point, where the law of God is here and the grace of God is over here. And we need the grace of God to save us from the law of God. Now, there is some truth to that. But that's not how it was presented in the Old Testament. How was it presented? Well, the 10 Commandments actually begins, the 10 words begin with these words: I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. So what's the basic context? The basic context is that you didn't get the law of God and then obey the law of God and then become God's people. No. God came to a people and he saved that people. He delivered that people. And then he gave them the gift of the law. And we wanted to look into that a little bit deeper tonight by just kind of studying this for a few moments. In Egypt, Israel had no ability to believe and to trust in God apart from his law, much less to do his law. They were in darkness. They were in bondage, without strength even to believe in the Lord God. In Exodus chapter 5, and one of the things about Exodus 16, we don't have the time tonight, and so I'm going to mention Exodus 5 back and forth a little bit. We don't have the time to really read through Exodus 5. But Exodus 5 and Exodus 16 are connected. There's language that connects these two texts. In Exodus 5, what we find is that Moses and Aaron are coming by the command of God. They go to the Pharaoh and they ask the Pharaoh, Pharaoh, can you let our people go out to the wilderness to worship the Lord God for 3 days? Okay, so that's how it begins. And what happens is that Pharaoh just unleashes. He unleashes on them. And here's what it says. This is, he starts pounding on them, right? That's when he tells them that they have to go out in the fields and they have to gather straw, because they used to supply the Israelites with straw so that they could keep making bricks. And now they said, we've been too nice. We're going to pull the straw back. You're going to have to gather straw and make bricks. Basically double the workload. And it just got worse. And we read this in verse 21 of chapter 5. And they said to them, let the Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us abhorrent in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, to put a sword in their hand to kill us. So here's the Israelites, the people that God is going to save, the people that Moses has come to, and now after they talked to Pharaoh, just like God commanded them to, now they come, and the Israelites come to Moses and Aaron, and they're like, you're killing us. You're killing us. Look what you've done. Look what you've done. You've turned Pharaoh against us. And so the question you need to ask yourself is why? Why is God doing this? Is God doing this? What's the point of it? Well, I believe that God is pressing Pharaoh. And so, in a sense, all of a sudden, the heavy oppression that's, the even more heavy oppression than regular that's descending on them is at the hand of God. But God's not doing that. Pharaoh's doing that. And God is making them a point. What he's doing is he's amplifying the situation that already exists. He's showing them what Pharaoh's true colors are. And what are those colors, right? Well, those colors is that he doesn't care about them. He hates them. He despises them. They're nothing to him. They're no one to him. They're beasts of burden, and that's it. And so what God is doing is amping up the pressure a little bit. Pharaoh is turning on these people and showing them what he really thinks about them. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But I want to turn for just a moment to Exodus chapter 6. Because here's, he sends, after this happens, then God says, go tell the children of Israel this. Starting at verse 6, he says, therefore say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord. I will bring you out under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will rescue you from their bondage, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm with great judgments. I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who brings you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And I will bring you into the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you as a heritage. I am the Lord. So Moses, verse 9, so Moses spoke thus to the children of Israel. Now listen, but they did not heed Moses because of anguish of spirit and cruel bondage. So God does not give this people the law first. This is a people that's broken. This is a people that are in darkness. This is a people that are under oppression. They can't even believe God. They can't even believe that he really is. In some way, they'll use his name to punish Moses and Aaron. Look what you've done. May the Lord judge you, Even though they don't even really know this God and they don't have really any respect for him. But look at what the Word of God says. Look at what the divine Word says, that they did not heed Moses because of anguish of spirit and cruel bondage. And brothers and sisters, there is a direct parallel with the way that God always works with his people. Before we can be saved, it is necessary that we know how bad it really is. When I'm young and I'm filled with myself, and I'm filled with the spirit of possibility in this world, and every day is a new thing, and I can go out and do what I want to do, and things fall into my lap, and life seems to be good, and I feel like there's one victory after another, one good thing after another, and my life is good. Why do I need the Lord? What do I need to be saved from? It doesn't even matter that if my eyes were opened a little bit and I look at all the things that are around me and I think to myself, if I even had a moment to think about it and say, these things aren't real. Money can't solve all your problems. Success can't solve all your problems. Right? Even if I can look at things clearly, even for just a moment, it's okay, right? That's the Israelites. They are in bondage. Pharaoh after Pharaoh is coming up, oppressing them, killing their children, killing their sons, right? Laying load after load after load. The only reason he feeds them is why? Because you're a beast of burden. If you're going to put an ox out in the field, you better feed them. If you're going to put your tractor out there, you better put fuel in it. That's why they have pots of meat. That's why they have bread to the full, so that you can crank out those bricks. But you know what? Everything's fine. But it's not. Just like us. I've brought her up before because there's certain stories that just kind of grab you. And most of you have heard of Whitney Houston, right? And like in the 90s, she was just like it, right? One of the most popular singers in the entire world. Everybody knows that woman's name. She's got fame, she's got glory, she's got money, she's doing movies. And I forget now how many years ago it was, but she wasn't even, I don't even think she was 50, or maybe she was just getting close to 50. She ends up dying in a bathtub, drug overdose. Her life was so broken and so empty, and she had everything that this world could offer. But it didn't satisfy her. And brothers and sisters, the prerequisite for getting the law of God and doing righteousness and doing judgment is that we first need to be saved. We need to be saved from the brokenness of our lives. We need to be saved from our sin and iniquity. We need to see the oppression that really is out there, because that's what Egypt represents. It represents Pharaoh and Egypt. They represent the power of the flesh. They represent everything the world can give you, but all those things are bondage. Ask any really wealthy man. Right? They buy homes and they buy yachts and they buy all this stuff, but ask them what the taxes are every year. Ask them how much it costs to keep it. Because the more you got in this world, the more you are enslaved. And the truth is I don't care how comfortable you think you are and what your retirement is, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the kind of things that will keep you awake at night. Here's why. Because there's something in the back of your mind and heart that says, yeah, but is it enough? What if the market drops like it did a few years ago? Right now it's worth $500,000. It could be worth 50. What am I going to do then? Right? That's what the world has to offer you. And so Egypt and the Pharaoh, they represent the strength and the bondage of the things of this world and how they grab us, how they hold us, how they wave these things in front of our face, even while we're in bondage. Yeah, but it was sure good bread, wasn't it? It sure was a good meal, wasn't it? And they're just these things that hold us. And when God opens our eyes by cranking up the pressure a little bit and showing us what the situation really is, and that's what he's done. God is not the one that's putting the oppression on them. It's the Pharaoh. It's the king that they're serving in this world. That king is ramping up the pressure. Why? Because he hates them. He has no care for them and no concern. And so when God comes to a people, they cannot serve him. They cannot hear his law. They cannot receive his law. They cannot do his law until first they're saved. That's the prerequisite. And that's the God who comes to them. So God delivers them, and actually there's some beautiful signs of being born again in the Passover. I'm not going to go through all those things. There's too many things. But they get in the wilderness, and they're gone, and they run out of food. And they cry out to God. And Moses, you can tell from his language too. I'm angry with them. They're crying out against me. Why are you crying out against me? Your complaint is against God. God says, I have heard their complaints. But how does God react compared to Pharaoh? He actually hears them. If you study chapter 5, what you're going to find is that the Pharaoh, he hears them and he doesn't hear them. He says, you're lazy, and you listen to false words, right? And he tells them, you know what? You just need to work harder. You just need to work harder. Not God. God gives the gift of this manna to a people that are hungry, to a people that are starving. And this is what he says. He gives the manna, but first in verse 4 we read, I will rain bread from heaven for you. The people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day that I may test them. Now listen to this. Whether they will walk in my law or not. So this manna is like a preparation for the law that's coming. So what does it mean to test them? You know, when we think about a test, immediately our first thought is a very narrow understanding of that, right? We look at a test and we say, oh, I don't like tests. Why not? Well, because it's pass or fail, right? I'm going to take this test, I'm going to fail, and then I'm a big loser, right? So there's the pressure of the test. But that's not really what a test does. Most times a test is something very good. It's very helpful. It's very it's very good for our instruction. Why? Because it helps us to see what we don't know. It helps us to see what we need to know. It helps us to understand things that we maybe don't see right now. But if I take this test and then somebody goes through it and they say, okay, well, you're really strong in these areas, but over here, you need some help. In a way, the manna is going to act kind of that way. But it's more than that, because it's actually a preparation. It's a preparation for the giving of the law, and it's going to give us some understanding of who God really is. And there's a comparison going on, and I won't have time to really go through all of it because we only have a few minutes left. But what happens is he gives 3 particular laws that go with the manna. So let's look at those very briefly. The first law, in some way, first of all, the first law, what is the first law? The first law is you're going to go out and you're going to gather. You're going to gather 1 omer per person in your tent. Okay? 1 omer. And so if you got 5 people, you're going to gather 5 omers, right? 10 people, you're going to gather 10 omers, etc. So that's the first law, has to do with how much. But I believe, so what is this first law really about? It points to the fact that under the administration of the law, all would be cared for. Not just the mighty, not just the strong. Now look at it, because there's something magical about these laws, right? There's something that's not quite earthly about these laws, right? Let every man gather it according to each one's need. 1 omer per person, according to the number of persons. Let every man take for those that are in his tent. They did so and gathered some more, some less. Now listen to this, verse 18. So they measured it by omers. He who gathered much had nothing left over, and he who gathered little had no lack. And it was almost like they went back, and I don't know if they did it by families or by tribes, and they weighed it, and then they just divided it fairly. And so there's some people that are strong and they're fast, and they go out and they collect all these omers, and maybe they get some extras. And there's others that are going out and they're not as strong and they're not as fast, and they're gathering as much as they can, but they don't have enough. But somehow when they come back, it gets divided in a way that everybody has exactly what they need. When Pharaoh sent the Israelites out and told them, I'm taking away your straw, they had to go out to the fields to gather straw. What do you think happened when they did that? Well, the guys that were the fastest and the guys that were the strongest, they gathered like mad, and they got enough to make their quota of bricks. Do you think if they had any extra, they helped out their brother that was on the other side of the field? They did not. Because Pharaoh's laws didn't advance that. But there's something about the law of God that this first manna law is telling us. It's telling us that under the law of God, that no matter who you are, God is going to care for all of you so that you will all be cared for. Not just the strong, not just the mighty, not just the quick, but the weak, the afflicted, the hurting. They're going to get what they need too, because that's how God's law is. God's law is designed to care for the whole community, not just the strong, not just the fast. The second thing that we see, the second law of manna, there was no storing of manna. There's no storing of manna, right? So if you tried, you say, well, I'm going to eat 2/3 of an omer and I'm going to put some away. Well, what would happen? Well, it's spoiled. The next morning it's done. It's got worms. It stinks. And so here again we find kind of a magical law. So what is that law telling us about the law of God? It's telling us that the law of God is not like the law of man. Under the law of man, even the most equal laws, the best laws, the strong, the mighty, the quick find a way, right? They find a way to make sure that they're taken care of. But under God's law, God says, you know what? my law requires faith. It requires faith that you believe what I say. And when I tell you that don't store it because tomorrow there's going to be more, you need to trust me. You need to believe. You need to believe that when I say tomorrow there's going to be more, there's going to be more. You see, there's things in the law of God, brothers and sisters, that require faith. Right? One of them is the Sabbath day laws. And I'm talking about the Sabbath years, really, because one of the laws that's attached to the fourth commandment is that you will work your fields for 6 years. But the seventh year, you got to let it lie. You have to let the land have a Sabbath. It needs a rest. Well, that takes a lot of faith, doesn't it? Because that means on the 6th year, you got to believe that we need to gather enough, and God is going to give us enough to live for the whole 7th year. Well, right, you got to pay your bills, and you got to have enough food to last you 2 years, right? Because there's going to be no crop on the 7th year. So I got to have double enough for the food plus enough for seed when it comes time, right? So usually they would have to have enough to eat for the year plus enough for seed for the next year. So now they're going to have to eat for 2 years plus seed. That takes faith. Faith that the Israelites didn't have. Right? Because that's when he casts them off the land. One of the last things it says in the last chapter of 2 Chronicles is that then Israel had her rest, her Sabbaths. The land had its Sabbath. Why? Because they were not doing it. Because they didn't believe. And there's other things in the law, and we'll see them when we get deeper into the law. But there's other things that are in the law of God that require faith. The law of God requires faith on our part. And so here, in the second law of manna, God says, don't store it. I'm going to give you fresh tomorrow. But some people don't believe that, right? We're the same way. Come on, we're no different. Yeah, well, I don't know that it's going to be there tomorrow. I better make sure. But God is not Pharaoh. When he speaks and he gives you a word, you can believe it. And in that second law of manna, he was teaching us, his people, trust in me, believe in me. And the law that he would give at Sinai would require that. You can believe in me. You can trust in me. And what he's doing is preparing them for that. Finally, in law number 3, gather double manna on Friday and no gathering manna on the Sabbath. Now think about this, how crazy this is. And this is what I'm talking about, having a magical quality to them. If you gather extra on Wednesday or Thursday, and then you try to store it away, you know, you take some of what's given to you or what you have there, and you try to store it. Well, you know, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. It's gonna spoil. It's gonna rot. It's gonna stink. But not on Friday night. Not on Friday night. On Friday night, you're going to gather. On Friday, you're going to gather double, and you're going to store it away. And on Saturday or the Sabbath, it's going to be fresh. It's not going to rot. It's not going to spoil. It's interesting. If you go back to chapter 5, the Pharaoh, he said in verse 5, he says, and Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are many now, and you make them rest from their labor. And you know, you have to parse that out. Yeah, it took me a little while to think about this. You know, why does he use that argument? The people are many now, and you want them to rest. Well, if you go back to chapter 1, what it was is the pharaohs were afraid because the population of the Israelites was so large. And the last thing the Pharaoh wants them to do is to have some time off. Because if they have time off, they can come together. If they come together, they'll start making plans to rebel, right? Because the Pharaoh in this world, the gods of this world, the kings of this world, they think of everything in materialistic terms. There's no trust. We got to be a step ahead of those guys all the time. And if they have time off and they have time to think and they have time to figure out how they can come against us, we can't keep control of them. The only way we can keep control of them is to not give them any rest and to just keep pressing them down. And you think about that. I'll just give you a quick example, right? You think about somebody that's on, and I use a simple one just because we know it, but like alcohol or drug abuse, right? These are people that they're going to have fun. We're going to have fun. We're going to go off and do what we want to do, and this is going to be great, right? Until that thing grabs you and it's got you. There's no rest, is there? That desire grabs you and it owns you and it holds you and it will not let you go. And that's Pharaoh with these people. You are my beasts of burden. I have an agenda. I have cities to build. I have pyramids to build. I got things going down, and you are my mules. You are my donkeys. You are my beasts of burden, and you will go until you're either dead or you have accomplished my mission. He doesn't want them to have time off. But God, your king, wants you to have time. Your king wants to spend time with you. Your king wants to know you. And he wants you to know him. And he also wants you to understand that life isn't just about go, 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 don't stop. He wants you to understand that your life is not just your occupation. It's not just your house. It's not just your family. It's bigger than that. You are created in the image of God. You are the inheritors of the earth. You will live on into eternity with a God who loves you and cares for you. A God who wants to spend time with you. A God who wants to know you. Pharaoh didn't want to know them. He knew everything he needed to know. They're beasts of burden. Just crack the whip a little harder. But not our Lord. So the manna is preparing God's people for a God who is a true king, a true father, a king who loves them. And so when we get the law of God, the whole idea is supposed to be that we recognize it as a royal law coming from a God who loves us, who cares for us. And the whole law of God is designed to enfold us in his arms, to uphold us, and to bless us. The whole law of God is meant to elevate us, right? You're not just simple beasts of burden, supposed to be working like dogs 7 days a week and no rest until you die. You were created for greater things. And so the manna is preparing us, preparing God's people to know him through his word, through his law, because all these laws, like I said, they had these magical quality that in some way, you could try to break them, and there were people that went out on the Sabbath. But by the way, one of the neat things about this is that the first time that the word Sabbath comes up, it actually comes up with Pharaoh. And you want them to rest? And then in chapter 16, we get an introduction into the Sabbath. The law hasn't even been printed yet. The fourth commandment hasn't even been given yet. but they're being introduced into the fact that God has saved you, he has delivered you, because he wants to know you. In John chapter 6, Jesus says this. These people asked him about signs and food. And he says, do not labor for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give you, because God the Father has set his seal on him. Then they said to him, what shall we do that we may work the works of God? Jesus answered and said to them, this is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he sent. Therefore they said to him, what sign will you perform then, that we may see it and believe you? What work will you do? Our fathers ate the manna in the desert, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Then Jesus said to them, most assuredly I say to you, Moses did not give you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Then they said to him, Lord, give us this bread always. And Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. God was already pointing to Jesus Christ and to the bread of heaven that God sends down, his one and only Son. Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes forth from the mouth of God. And in the end, Jesus Christ is the living word. He is the God. He is the manna that comes down from heaven to feed us, to care for us. Why? Because we have a Father who loves us. A Father who knows that your life means far more than just the work that you do. It means far more than just the homes that you live in. You are sons and daughters of the eternal Most High God. Amen.